Let's break the political talk show mold. Anything worth doing is hard, and that includes being a good citizen. Our mission is to help you be that better citizen by letting you hear about stuff you might not know, which will make everyone think you're so smart, or by giving you a chance to listen to interviews and debates on a wide variety of subjects that might actually allow you to form new opinions in the privacy of your own mind. I'm Justin Oldham, and you are listening to the Politics and Patriotism Show here on the Stitcher Smart Radio Network. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another civic edition of the Politics and Patriotism Show. In this episode, we're going to take you overseas to the United Kingdom and revisit a topic that we first brought to your attention last year. Jane Hatton is a very industrious woman, and she runs a company called EvenBreak, and their job is to help disabled people find employers in the United Kingdom who are willing to hire them. Now, that's a good thing in and of itself, but her mission takes on a new sense of urgency when you discovered that the British government, in an effort to balance its books, has hired a company to screen all the disabled people who are currently drawing welfare benefits. They're trying to figure out who's a slacker and who's a real benefit case. And in some cases, they're taking people off the benefit rolls who should not be taken off those benefit rolls in the first place. Now, some of that may sound a little far-fetched, so in the next half hour, I'm going to let you hear all of this from Jane herself. I bring this to your attention as a matter of civics. No, I'm not stuttering. It's not an accident that I mentioned the C word twice. The simple fact of the matter is that if it can happen over there, it can happen here. And I just want you to hear this on your own terms, in your own time, in your own way, as food for thought, so that in the event that this comes up in the popular media or in the social media, or you hear about it in the bathroom, whatever it happens to be, that you will be ready for that discussion and you'll be ready to make up your own mind when the time comes. So, get comfortable, set your web browser to www.evenbreak.co.uk, and get ready for a surprise, because at the end of this program, after Jane has outlined the problem for you, she's going to tell you about her solution.
Okay, well, I'm Jane Hatton, and I run a not-for-profit social enterprise called EvenBreak. And EvenBreak is a specialist job board which helps inclusive employers attract more disabled candidates, and it helps disabled job seekers find work with employers who will value their skills, and it promotes the benefits of employing disabled people. I think that's about it in a nutshell.
Now, you and I spoke last year about what the UK government was doing to take people off the disability rolls to balance their books. And so I thought it would be appropriate to come back to you here in 2013 to get the update. And as I was talking to you off air, you've indicated that their policy continues, that not a whole lot has changed. And I want our American audience to hear that from you, that they're just keeping on.
Yeah, there's a number of things happening. I think that, like most of the countries at the moment, there is a deficit. We do have to save money. There's a problem. One of the main things is that the biggest burden seems to be falling on the poorest people. So there are all sorts of new and inventive ways that the government have come up with which will penalise people who are disabled, people who are out of work, people who are in work but earning low wages, people who work part-time, single parents. The people who are already struggling with life seem to be paying the greatest amount towards sorting the problem out. On the same day that they are announcing a bizarre tax, which I'll tell you about in a moment, called bedroom tax, which is where you penalise people in social housing for having a spare bedroom, they are on the same day giving further tax breaks to people who earn, a lot of money, so that the millionaires get much, much richer. The people who can barely afford to eat are getting much, much poorer. So that's happening. And I think it's sort of couched in a kind of bizarre rationale that says we can starve people into working. So there's an assumption here that people who aren't currently working, have no intention of working, are lazy, are scroungers, are work shy. And if we just make life bad enough for them, we will force them to work, and that will solve the problem. Two things that are founded on which aren't the case. People who are out of work are not work shy or lazy. There aren't jobs for them to get. And penalising people is not going to provide jobs that just don't exist. So if the jobs aren't there, people can't get them. It doesn't matter how aspirational, how ambitious, how hard-working somebody might be. If the jobs aren't there, they can't get them.
I will give your government credit for one very important thing. Your Prime Minister has been honest with your population about the state of your economy. And I unfortunately can't say that about what the Obama administration is telling us here on this side of the pond. They keep telling us things are getting better, and yet an increasingly large number of my colleagues with and without disabilities are losing their jobs. And if that's not proof that the economy is going bad, I don't know what is. And when I look at what's going on in the disability community, it further proves the point, because if you can't get a job as a non-disabled person, it's doubly or triply hard to get the same sort of job in a competitive environment when you do have a disability.
Yeah, indeed. And also, as a disabled person, the additional costs that a disabled person has often enable them to go to work, whereas otherwise they might not be able to. We have a benefit currently in the UK called the Disability Living Allowance. And this is paid to qualifying disabled people, whether or not they work. And it's a recognition of the additional costs of being disabled. And many people, myself included, will use this benefit in order to help them work. So it might pay for their transport to work. It may pay for the right kind of clothing to go to work. And they're going to now abolish this particular benefit, the Disability Living Allowance, and replace it with a new one called Personal Independent Payment, which sounds lovely, except that they're taking £500,000, and more than that, I can't remember the figure, out of the equation. So 500,000 fewer people will be eligible for this particular disability. So what will happen is that those people who are currently able to work because they have this additional benefit now won't be able to work. So they will be on job seekers allowance instead of earning a wage and paying tax and buying things in shops which help the economy. So sometimes these kind of devices which they think will help the economy grow are far more expensive than they might appear at first glance. And another example of that is this bedroom tax that I alluded to earlier on. And this is where people who have low incomes and live in social housing, so either council houses or housing association houses, their housing benefit is going to be cut if they have what the government deems to be a spare bedroom or 2 spare bedrooms. But what that means is that if, for example, a divorced couple who share the care of their children, only one of that couple can claim a bedroom for their children. So for the absent parent, when the children come to visit, they have to sleep on the floor or the settee. If a married couple are deemed to just have 1 bedroom, so if one of the couple is disabled and needs a room to themselves and the other person needs to sleep in another room, that doesn't count. So they will still be penalised because they need to sleep in separate bedrooms. And 2/3 of the people affected have a disabled person in the family. So again, it might look like a universal cut, but it's very, very disproportionately aimed at disabled people.
That's absolutely amazing, and I'd like to point out our American audience that those of you who snore really loud and like to pick up your pillow and go into the other room, that's a real convenience. But what Jane is talking about here in her country, you'd pay for that tremendously.
Well, and even, if you've come out of hospital, you've just had an operation, or you're not very well, or one who's got a tummy bug, or there's all sorts of reasons why couples might have the occasional night when they don't sleep in the same bed. It's not an unusual phenomenon, but now that there would be a cost attached to that. And of course, the really stupid thing is that people don't have the choice. Because if you happen to be in a three-bedded accommodation, maybe you've had children, they've grown up there, you might have acquired a disability, the house has been adapted for your condition, and now your children have left home and they're saying you've got to move down to a one-bedroom flat. That's fine, but there aren't any one-bedroom flats. So it isn't a choice for tenants. They don't have the choice of saying, well, let's go to a smaller property or pay extra to stay where we are. They have to pay the extra because there are no smaller properties. Struggling to eat as it is without having even less benefit.
Now, there is more to this than meets the eye, but unfortunately we need to take a quick commercial break. But when we come back on the other side, I'd like to point out a few interesting residential details that may surprise some of our American listeners.
Luke Herbert here, co-host of the 3 Feet Radio Show. You can interact with the show via Twitter at 3 Feet Radio and via Facebook at 3 Feet Radio. You can also email us at info@3feetradio.com. Ben Carbonaro and myself look forward to interacting with you in 2013.
Several of our show contributors who hail from the United Kingdom have described how council housing works, and there can be rather lengthy waiting lists. You can sometimes be on these lists for years if you want to relocate to something larger or something smaller. So while you're waiting, you're going to get dinged by this tax.
Absolutely, yeah. And the wait could be forever, because it could be that you've got an authority where there are 20,000 people who want to downsize their properties, and there are only 60 small properties. So you could be on the waiting list for 50 years. You'd be dead before you got to the end of the waiting list. The only opportunity for some people to downsize is to go into the private rented sector, which is notoriously more expensive, so their housing benefit will go up. So what will happen is that a family will have been forced to move into a smaller property, which they don't want to be in, and it's going to cost the taxpayer more because the rent is higher than it would have been if they'd have stayed where they were originally. It makes no sense in any way, shape or form.
I sense the hand of civil service in there somewhere. But I can say that with as much bitterness as I like, because I'm former civil service myself. So with that qualification in mind, I would, since we're doing this update here, and there will be some people in our audience coming to this for the very first time, I would like you to describe the process that a disabled person in the United Kingdom goes through when they come to the attention of your government, when they're being put through this process of being taken off the disability rolls, especially when it's undeserved, because there's got to be a certain degree of helplessness involved, and we're all going to cheer when you find the cheats. But those people are so rare, they're so hard to find, that you can't help but wonder how many honestly disabled that they're intentionally taking off the rolls just because they're trying to trim the budget.
It reads like some kind of horror story, and I would be quite understanding if people in your country didn't believe what I'm saying, because it sounds unbelievable as I'm telling you the story. There used to be a benefit called incapacity benefit, which was for people who were too sick or disabled to work. That has been replaced by something called employment support allowance. And there's been a changeover, so anybody who was on income support has to go through an assessment process called the work capability assessment in order to then go on to, if they qualify, employment support allowance. This work capability assessment is designed by the DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions, which is a government body, but it is implemented, it is put into practice by a French IT company called Atos. And basically, it's a computer questionnaire. So if you are a disabled person and you are called to a work capability assessment, you will be asked a series of questions by somebody who is supposed to be medically qualified, but this might be someone who's done a first aid certificate 12 years ago. And it follows a process, and it will ask certain questions. And there'll be questions like, can you lift an empty box? Can you press one button with one finger? And then there are sort of scores put against each of these descriptors. and you have to get 15 points against any of these descriptors to be said that you're not fit for work and that you can continue to claim the benefit that you've been having for however many years you've been having it. But they're not realistic. How many jobs would require you to lift an empty box, or just to be able to push one button with one finger? And they don't take into account things like variable conditions, which most conditions are. Most of us who are disabled will have good days and bad days and worse days. And this doesn't take into consideration that on a really, really good day, you might be able to lift an empty box. On a bad day, you'd hardly be able to get out of bed. And so what's happening is that people are going through this ridiculous work capability assessment. Most are being found fit for work, because that means they lose their benefit. And then they lose their benefit straight away, even if they appeal. And then they appeal. And 40% of those who appeal win their appeal. That means that nearly half of the decisions were wrong in the first place. And it's worse than that, because the stress that this can put on people, you can imagine the stress of barely being able to cope and then being told that you've got to go out and find work when you know you're physically not capable of doing so, or mentally not capable of doing so, has killed people. And we reckon on average 73 people a week die within weeks of their work capability assessment. So we're not just talking about this is a little bit inconvenient for people, we're talking about life and death.
Okay, so how many of these deaths are attributed to stress-induced difficulties? And if I may be so indelicate to ask, how many of these deaths are attributed to suicides?
Quite a number. I think that 73 a week doesn't include the suicides that are attributed to this. And there are many suicides, and people will have left notes saying that they can't face the assessment that's coming up, or that they've had the assessment and can't face waiting for the result, or they may have the letter that's invited them to the assessment open on the kitchen table, and they've died they've ended their life that day. I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe the 73 a week doesn't include all of those. The 73 a week includes people who have died within I can't remember how many it is, a certain amount of weeks of being told that they are fit for work. Some people had terminal illnesses. If you have a terminal illness, but you haven't been deemed that you're going to die within 6 months, you're still declared fit for work. If you have cancer and your oncologist has said to you, we give you 8 months, you'd be fit for work. That's a hell of a lot of stress in your last 8 months.
I can certainly believe that. And again, the reason that I want an American audience to hear this is that if it can happen to you, it can happen to us, because your governmental traditions and our governmental traditions are so similar, the bureaucratic processes are so similar, that because of the way our court systems work, the idea there can be transplanted here, and if you can't fight it, we can't fight it. And as grim as that is, I want people to hear it from you, because if I sit here and I just read the news copy, then people are going to think I'm making this up.
Mm. To be fair, though, I mean, I'm on a number of forums for people like me who are quite severely disabled, and a number of American people on there. And the situation in your country isn't that great either, is it? In terms of people having to prove that they need insurance, or that they need support, is pretty grim over there as well. So, I mean, I think it's a different system that you use in the USA, but it's still not easy being a disabled person that can't work, and still being judged as somebody who should be able to work.
Now that, that we're going to have to revisit at a later date. But the thing that concerns me the most is that in calendar year 2014, just 12 months from now, our new healthcare laws kick in, the thing that we call Obamacare. And while that is not a full-blown national health service, it takes us so close to a national health service that I could reach over the back fence and touch it. And as soon as that kicks in, within just 5 to 7 years, the federal bureaucracy will have grown to such an extent that there will be a new layer of civil service in place that will be capable of making the same decisions that you are fighting against right now. Now, speaking of fighting things, we've got one more commercial break that we just can't put off any longer. And when we come back on the other side, I would like you to please tell us more about EvenBreak.
This program is brought to you by ShadowFusionBooks.com.
I want to come back to your organization, EvenBreak, and I would like you to tell us how it got started, because it's all fine and well for me to talk about what this is and what it's doing to us, but I would like people to know how you fight this. So tell us how you got this thing started.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I think, despite all the doom and gloom that we hear about and we talk about, there are good people out there in all sorts of walks of life. And one of the things that I discovered before becoming disabled myself was that there are a number of employers who genuinely understand that having a diverse workforce is a good thing, not just from a charity point of view, but from a pure commercial business perspective. And I would talk to employers about the benefits of employing disabled people, and occasionally they would say, actually, we agree. We would like to employ far more disabled people than we do, but we really struggle to attract disabled applicants. And then when I became disabled myself and I was trying to learn all about my new identity, because your whole sense of identity changes when you become disabled, and I was talking to other disabled people, and I would say, why is this that these companies are finding it difficult to attract people like us, who've got all the skills and talents that they're looking for? And they would say, because the minute you say to an employer, I have a sight impairment, I've got a mental health issue, I use a wheelchair, whatever it is, that at that moment your application form goes in the bin. So I sort of got thinking, we've got some employers who are enlightened enough to understand that actually, disabled people would make great employees. And we have all of these disabled people with all the skills and talents that they need, and they're just not finding each other. So EvenBreak came about to solve both of those problems so that employers could go to one place and put their job adverts, and they would get additional disabled applicants on top of those that they would get from any other source they might use. But also, disabled job seekers would know that the kind of employers who pay to advertise their jobs on a site that's only going to attract disabled candidates are likely to take them seriously, are likely to look past their disabilities at what they have to offer, and they can be more open. And so these two groups of people join together, and it's working really well. We've got some quite big employers who are using EvenBreak now. We have Network Rail, the sort of private arm now that used to run the state-owned sort of network railways. We have E.ON, who are an electricity energy supplier. We have John Lewis Partnership, who are a huge retail organisation. BBC Broadcasting, all sorts of Unipart, Rank, all sorts of large organisations who now understand that the more diverse your workforce, the better, the more commercially viable you're going to be, because we're attracting a diverse customer base, and the more diverse our employees are, then the more they can understand the needs of our customers. So it's working well. I mean, it seems to be counter the sort of general ethos in the country, which is all disabled people are scroungers. That's the kind of media hype that goes on. But I think, we've had the Paralympics, and I do think that some companies are beginning to realise now that you can find talent in all sorts of places, and that disabled people have just the same range of talent and skills as any other group in the population, and that if they're not hitting that particular talent pool, they're really missing out as a commercial organisation.
I agree with that entirely, and I also find that it's quite useful to confront an employer and ask them, and sometimes ask them in a joking way, would you like to hire me, or would you like to hire my disability, because I hear he works cheap? And that's a useful point to make, because most people just never think of it. Are you hiring the person, or are you hiring the disability? And as soon as you engage their brain, it causes a lot of their prejudices to melt.
Yeah, it's about challenging the myths, and I think a lot of employers go around without really questioning the myths, which are, disabled people are going to be off sick all the time, and they're going to leave their jobs, and they're going to have accidents, and they're going to be expensive, and all of those sort of almost unquestioned myths that they carry around with them will will automatically turn them off employing disabled people. But when you start getting to talk to employers and you say, do you know that all the studies show that disabled people are just as productive as non-disabled people on average, but they have less time off sick, fewer workplace accidents, stay in their jobs longer, bring all sorts of skills with them that they've had to develop in order to navigate their way around a world that wasn't designed for them, like creativity, innovation, persistence, determination. All of those are really good skills for an employee to have. You start talking about fact rather than myth, employers start to get interested. So here's a group of people who they're not going to be off sick, they're not going to leave their jobs, we're going to increase our retention. If they need, I don't know how it works in America, but certainly in England, for reasonable adjustments that disabled people might need, most of that is paid for by the government through access to work. So there isn't a cost for the employer, or is very minimal cost for the employer. So when employers actually start to look at the truth rather than all the myths that there are around, they start to realise, actually, here is a talent pool we've been ignoring at our peril. We really need to start looking at this talent pool.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you can say that and do that and actually make it work. So can you please give us your website address?
Absolutely, www.evenbreak.co.uk. At the moment, we're just looking at UK employers. I'd like to think eventually we might sort of have a franchise or something, globally, because I think the concept is important. We're trying it out in the UK and it's working very successfully here, but the concept is important, I think, in every country.
I hope other people are inspired by your example, and I urge them to start grassroots initiatives like this in whatever country they live in. And that's not something I say lightly. Those of us who are born with disabilities have been told since day one that we can't because we're not whole, because we're broken, because we're not good enough, or that we shouldn't because we might fail. We're always going to hear the voices of those detractors, and we're always going to feel their influence. But that doesn't mean we have to accept their lack of faith. If anything, their prejudice should motivate us to try just a little bit harder, because proving them wrong will be oh so much sweeter when we do succeed. And if you doubt me because you think there is no proof to back up what I say, then I'd like you to consider two small, minor, insignificant details. The first would be the guest you just heard on this program, who is herself disabled, running a business that helps the disabled find jobs. The second would be me, because I've been legally blind since birth, and I own and operate the Politics and Patriotism show. So anyone who says that the disabled need to sit down, shut up, take their welfare check, and be just a little bit more compliant needs to find a better argument. Because if this episode proves anything at all, it demonstrates that people like me are here to rock the boat, sink the boat, and rebuild it as a hovercraft. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you heard here today, you can find us online at politicsandpatriotism.com, where you can subscribe to all of our past episodes for free simply by clicking on the RSS feed, or you can go to the iTunes store and download all of our past episodes for free, or you can go to Stitcher.com, and thanks to the very nice people at Stitcher Smart Radio Network, you can download any number of their free apps, which will allow you to hear us on your tablet or your iPhone or your Android device, anywhere you might happen to be employed, with or without disabilities, on this green earth. So, on behalf of everyone here at the show, thank you for your time and have a good day.